I'm Tyler Johnson, 32, a software developer from Seattle, Washington. Last Christmas, I drove 1,200 miles through snow and ice storms to spend the holidays with my family in Phoenix. I thought coming home would feel warm and welcoming after 3 years of missed celebrations due to work commitments. I was dead wrong. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. When I pulled into my parents' driveway on Christmas Eve carrying bags full of carefully chosen gifts and my girlfriend Jessica's homemade fudge, my mom Patricia opened the door with a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. Behind her stood my dad Robert, my sister Ashley with her 2 kids, and my brother Kevin sprawled on the couch like he owned the place. The house buzzed with the familiar chaos of family gatherings, the smell of turkey and pine mixing in the warm Arizona air. That's when my mom dropped the bomb that would change everything between us forever. "Oh, Tyler, sweetie, we didn't really prepare your old room. Ashley's kids are sleeping there, and Kevin's got the guest room. You can sleep in the garage tonight, can't you? It's not that cold." Her voice carried that fake cheerful tone I remembered from childhood when she was delivering bad news disguised as a reasonable request. I stood there, suitcase in hand, watching my family continue their conversations like nothing happened. Jessica squeezed my arm, her face flushed with embarrassment and anger. My sister Ashley didn't even look up from her phone, while Kevin actually smirked from the couch, raising his beer bottle in a mock salute. "Welcome home, big shot tech guy," he said with a laugh that made my stomach turn. What happened next exposed a secret I'd been hiding for 5 years, one that would make them realize exactly who they'd just humiliated. The consequences of their decision would ripple through our family in ways none of us expected. And what I did in response taught them a lesson about respect they'll never forget. Growing up in the Johnson household in Phoenix meant understanding your place in the family hierarchy, and mine was always somewhere near the bottom. My sister Ashley was the princess, the one who got straight A's without trying and charmed everyone at family gatherings with her perfect manners and quick wit. She married her college boyfriend right after graduation, gave my parents their first grandchildren, and lived the traditional life they'd always dreamed of for their kids. Kevin, despite being the youngest, held the special position of the baby who could do no wrong. Even when he dropped out of college twice, crashed Dad's truck, or showed up drunk to family dinners, he was just going through a phase or finding himself. My parents would shake their heads with fond exasperation, like his failures were endearing character quirks rather than serious problems. Then there was me, Tyler, the middle child who disappeared into computer screens and code, building websites in my bedroom, while my siblings collected trophies and praise. I wasn't particularly social, preferring debugging software to small talk at family barbecues. My parents would introduce me to their friends as our quiet one or the computer kid, never quite knowing how to explain what I actually did for work. When I graduated with a degree in computer science and landed my first job at a software startup in Seattle, my parents were proud but confused. Technology felt foreign to them, something their son was good at but that they couldn't really understand or brag about to their neighbors. Dad would tell people I worked with computers, while Mom would add that I made decent money, though they never really grasped how decent it actually was. The first time they asked for help, I was 25 and barely 2 years into my career. Dad's landscaping business was struggling through a harsh Arizona summer, and they needed $8,000 to replace a broken irrigation truck. I wired the money without hesitation, thinking it would finally prove that their quiet computer kid had grown into someone worth respecting. They were grateful, genuinely so, and for a brief moment I felt like a real part of the family. Dad clapped me on the shoulder and said I was really coming through when it mattered, while Mom told all her friends how her son had saved their business. It felt incredible to be the hero instead of the afterthought. But that gratitude had an expiration date, and soon the requests became more frequent and less appreciative. Mom needed help with credit card debt from Ashley's wedding expenses. Kevin required bail money after a DUI arrest that Dad was too embarrassed to handle alone. Ashley's husband lost his job, so they needed assistance with their mortgage to avoid foreclosure. Each time I said yes, Each time I convinced myself this was what families did for each other. Each time I believed that my financial support would translate into emotional acceptance and respect. I was building a bridge to my family one wire transfer at a time, never realizing that they saw me less as a beloved son and brother, and more as a reliable ATM who happened to share their last name. The biggest moment came 3 years ago when my parents decided to expand their landscaping business. They'd been operating with old equipment and wanted to bid on larger commercial contracts that required newer trucks, professional-grade mowers, and specialized irrigation systems. The expansion would cost $150,000, money they didn't have and couldn't qualify for on their own. That's when Dad called me, his voice uncharacteristically humble. "Tyler, I know this is a big ask, but we've got this opportunity that could set us up for retirement. The bank will approve the loan if we have a co-signer with good credit and steady income. Would you consider helping us out? This could change everything for our family." I should have asked more questions. I should have demanded to see business plans, profit projections, or at least a clear timeline for how they planned to pay off such a massive loan. Instead, I heard the word family and the promise that this would change everything, and I drove to Phoenix that weekend to sign papers that made me personally responsible for more money than I'd ever seen in my life. The loan approval went through, and suddenly Johnson Landscaping transformed from a small family operation into a legitimate commercial enterprise. They bought 3 new trucks, hired additional crew members, and started landing contracts with shopping centers and office complexes across the Phoenix metro area. For the first few months, business boomed, and my parents were happier than I'd seen them in years. But success in business doesn't automatically translate to success in family relationships. Despite literally making their expansion possible, I remained the same Tyler I'd always been in their eyes. When I visited for holidays, they'd talk excitedly about their new contracts and equipment, but rarely mentioned how any of it became possible. Ashley would brag to relatives about Dad's growing business, while Kevin would joke about becoming a landscaping mogul someday. Meanwhile, I was quietly paying attention to the business's finances in ways they probably didn't realize. As a co-signer on the loan, I received copies of all the bank statements and payment notices. What I saw worried me. The business was profitable, but Dad was terrible with money management. He'd spend heavily during busy seasons without saving for the slower winter months, then struggle to make loan payments when contracts dried up. Twice in the past 2 years, I'd quietly transferred money to their business account to cover loan payments they couldn't make. Not loans or gifts to them personally, but direct payments to the bank to protect my own credit and prevent default on a loan I was legally responsible for. They never knew, and I never told them, but I was essentially subsidizing their business expansion while watching them take all the credit for their success. The pattern extended beyond just business finances. When Ashley's family needed a new car, my parents co-signed and helped with the down payment using money from business.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Profits that existed partly because of my backing. When Kevin decided to move into his own apartment after years of living at home, they covered his security deposit and first month's rent. The family's improved financial situation allowed them to be generous with everyone except the person who'd made it all possible. I told myself it didn't matter. I was making good money in Seattle, my career was progressing, and I was building a life with Jessica that didn't depend on my family's approval. But deep down, it stung every time I visited Phoenix and felt like a guest in my own family. I was funding their lifestyle improvements while remaining the outsider looking in. Last year's Christmas was particularly painful. I'd flown down for just 3 days because of work deadlines, and the entire time felt rushed and impersonal. Ashley's kids had expensive new toys that my parents had bought them, while Kevin drove around in a used car that Dad had helped him finance. The house itself looked better than ever, with new furniture and holiday decorations that spoke to their improved financial situation. Yet when I mentioned some of the exciting projects I was working on in Seattle, eyes would glaze over. When Jessica tried to share stories about our life together, conversations would quickly shift to Ashley's kids or Kevin's latest job search. I was welcome in their home, but I wasn't really part of their lives. That's why this Christmas felt so important to me. I'd been promoted to senior developer, Jessica and I were talking seriously about engagement, and I wanted to share these milestones with my family. I'd specifically requested time off, planned the long drive from Seattle, and even bought expensive gifts for everyone, including toys I'd researched carefully for Ashley's kids. The 200-mile drive through winter weather gave me plenty of time to imagine how different this visit would be. Maybe Ashley would finally see me as a successful adult, rather than her weird little brother. Maybe Kevin would respect that I'd built something meaningful with my life. Maybe my parents would ask real questions about my work and relationship, showing genuine interest in who I'd become. I pictured us sitting around the Christmas tree, sharing stories and laughing together like families do in movies. I imagined Jessica fitting seamlessly into our holiday traditions, charming my parents and playing with Ashley's kids. I even bought a bottle of expensive wine to share with Dad, thinking it might create one of those meaningful father-son moments we'd never really had. The fantasy sustained me through hours of driving, past snow-covered mountains and desert landscapes, through truck stops and gas stations where I'd call Jessica to share my excitement about seeing everyone. She was nervous about meeting my family, but I assured her they'd love her once they got to know her. I painted pictures of warm Arizona evenings, family dinners full of laughter, and the kind of holiday memories that would make all the years of distance and misunderstanding fade away. By the time I pulled into my parents' familiar driveway, I was genuinely excited for the first time in years about a family gathering. The house looked festive with lights strung across the roof and a wreath on the front door. I could hear voices and laughter inside, the sounds of a family celebrating together. Jessica grabbed the container of homemade fudge she'd spent hours perfecting, while I gathered the carefully wrapped presents from our trunk. Walking up to that front door, I felt hopeful in a way I hadn't experienced since childhood. This was going to be the Christmas that changed everything, the visit that finally brought me fully into the family circle. I knocked, heard footsteps approaching, and prepared to be welcomed home by people who would finally see me as I really was. Instead, I got Patricia's tight smile, Robert's distracted nod, and the casual announcement that their successful son and his girlfriend would be sleeping in the garage like unwanted houseguests. In that moment, surrounded by the warm glow of Christmas lights and the sound of family laughter, I realized that no amount of money, success or sacrifice would ever earn me the respect and love I'd been chasing for years. The garage door opened to reveal a cluttered space filled with landscaping equipment, Christmas decorations from previous years, and boxes of storage items that hadn't seen daylight in months. The concrete floor was cold and stained with oil spots, while the single overhead bulb cast harsh shadows on walls lined with garden tools and fertilizer bags. This was where my parents thought it was appropriate for their adult son and his girlfriend to spend Christmas Eve. Jessica stood beside me, her face flushed with embarrassment and barely controlled anger. She'd dressed carefully for this meeting, wanting to make a good impression on my family, and now she was staring at a garage that smelled of gasoline and old grass clippings. The contrast between the warm, beautifully decorated house and this cold, unwelcoming space spoke volumes about my place in the Johnson family hierarchy. But what they didn't know, as I stood there processing their casual dismissal, was that I held the power to turn their comfortable world upside down. Hidden in my wallet was a business card that could change everything, and in my bank account was leverage they'd never seen coming. Their decision to humiliate me in front of Jessica wasn't just hurtful, it was about to become the most expensive mistake they'd ever made. Standing in that garage, surrounded by the smell of motor oil and stored Christmas decorations, I felt something inside me snap. Not break, but snap into place like a puzzle piece finally finding its proper position. Jessica's hand found mine, her grip tight with barely contained fury at the casual way my family had dismissed us both. Through the thin garage door, I could hear the sounds of Christmas Eve continuing without us. Ashley's voice rose above the others, telling some animated story that had everyone laughing. Kevin's deeper laugh boomed out, probably at some joke made at someone else's expense. My parents' voices blended into the familiar soundtrack of a family celebration that had never really included me, even when I was physically present. Jessica turned to me, her dark eyes flashing with an anger I'd rarely seen from her. She'd spent weeks preparing for this trip, researching my family members so she could ask thoughtful questions, practicing stories that would help her connect with people she desperately wanted to like her. She'd made that fudge from my grandmother's recipe, spending an entire Saturday perfecting the texture and flavor because she knew how important this visit was to me. "Tyler, this is insane," she whispered, her voice shaking with emotion. "They just told their adult son and his girlfriend to sleep in a garage, on Christmas Eve. Like we're some kind of inconvenience they have to tolerate." She gestured at the concrete floor, the oil stains, the cobwebs hanging from the corners. "Look at this place. They wouldn't treat strangers this badly." I wanted to defend them, to make excuses like I'd been doing my entire adult life. Maybe they really hadn't expected us, even though I'd confirmed our visit 3 weeks ago. Maybe Ashley's kids really did need the room more than we did. Maybe this was just a misunderstanding that we could laugh about later, another quirky family story that would seem funny in retrospect. But standing there, watching Jessica's face crumple with disappointment and humiliation, I couldn't find the words to excuse the inexcusable. This wasn't a misunderstanding or poor planning, this was a deliberate message about my place in the family hierarchy, delivered with the casual cruelty that comes from years of taking someone for granted. "You know what the worst part is?" Jessica continued, her voice getting stronger as her anger built. "They didn't even seem embarrassed about it. Your mom delivered that news like she was offering us a fun adventure. 'You can sleep in the garage tonight, can't you?' Like it was a reasonable request instead of completely insulting." She was right, and her clarity helped me see the situation without the filter of family loyalty that had clouded my judgment for years. My parents hadn't stumbled into this arrangement or made an honest mistake. They'd chosen to prioritize everyone else's comfort over mine, then delivered the news with a smile that suggested I should be grateful for any accommodation at all. The sound of footsteps approached the garage door, and Kevin's voice called out, muffled but audible, "Hey Tyler, you guys getting settled out there? Mom wants to know if you need any blankets or anything." His tone carried that familiar mix of fake concern and barely concealed amusement that I remembered from childhood. Jessica and I exchanged glances. She shook her head slightly, a warning not to respond with the politeness that had gotten us into this situation. For once I listened to that voice telling me to protect my dignity instead of keeping the peace. "We're fine," I called back, my voice carefully neutral. I heard Kevin's footsteps retreat, probably carrying news of our compliance back to the family gathering. Good, let them think we were quietly accepting this arrangement, let them continue their celebration knowing they'd successfully put me in my place once again. But as I stood there in that cold garage, something fundamental had shifted in my understanding of my relationship with my family. For years I'd operated under the assumption that my financial contributions were investments in family bonds, deposits into an emotional bank account that would eventually pay dividends in love and respect. Tonight had proven that account was empty, had always been empty, would always be empty no matter how much I deposited. My parents and siblings had taken my money, my support, my sacrifice, and converted it all into comfort and security for themselves, while keeping me at arm's length emotionally. Jessica began unpacking our overnight bags with sharp, efficient movements that spoke to her barely controlled anger. She pulled out the Christmas pajamas she'd bought specially for this trip, soft red flannel that she'd imagined wearing while opening presents by a warm fireplace. Instead she'd be wearing them on an air mattress in a freezing garage, listening to the sounds of a family celebration happening without us. "I need to call Brandon," I said suddenly, reaching for my phone. Brandon Walsh had been my college roommate, now worked as an accountant in Seattle, and had listened to years of stories about my complicated relationship with my family. More importantly, he understood money and business in ways that had helped me navigate financial decisions throughout my career. Jessica looked up from her unpacking. "Now, it's Christmas Eve, Tyler, can't this wait until tomorrow?" I shook my head, dialing his number. Brandon answered on the second ring, his voice warm with holiday cheer. "Tyler, Merry Christmas, buddy. How's the family visit going? Please tell me your mom made those amazing tamales again. Brandon, I need your advice about something and I need it now. My voice must have carried more urgency than I intended because his tone immediately shifted to serious. What's going on? You sound weird. I walked Jessica through the garage situation, then explained the deeper context of my financial relationship with my family. Brandon knew about some of the loans and gifts over the years, but I'd never laid out the full scope of my financial entanglement with Johnson Landscaping. Wait, back up, Brandon interrupted. You're telling me you co-signed a $150,000 business loan for your parents, and they just told you to sleep in their garage? On Christmas Eve? While you're visiting with your girlfriend? That's exactly what I'm telling you. Brandon was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice carried the careful precision of someone working through financial calculations in his head. Tyler, do you realize what kind of leverage that gives you? As a cosigner, you have legal rights regarding that loan. And if the business defaults, you're personally liable for the full amount. I did realize it had been carefully monitoring the loan payments for months. What I hadn't fully considered was using that position strategically rather than simply protecting myself from financial liability. Walk me through my options, I said, moving to the far corner of the garage where Jessica couldn't hear every word. She was pretending to organize our belongings, but I could tell she was listening. Brandon's voice took on the focused tone he used when discussing complex financial situations with his clients. Okay, first thing you need to understand is that as a cosigner you're not just liable for the debt, you also have rights. You can request financial statements, demand accountability for how the money is being used, and in extreme cases you can call the loan due if you believe the primary borrowers are mismanaging the funds. Call the loan due, what does that mean exactly? It means you can force them to pay off the entire remaining balance immediately. Most cosigner agreements include clauses that allow this in cases of financial mismanagement, or if the cosigner's financial interests are being threatened. I felt my heart rate increase as the implications sank in, and if they can't pay it off immediately, then the bank would typically foreclose on any collateral securing the loan. In the case of a business loan like this, that would probably mean seizing business assets, equipment, maybe even forcing a business closure. The sound of laughter from inside the house drifted through the garage door, a reminder of the family celebration continuing without us. Ashley's children were probably opening Christmas Eve presents, a tradition my parents had maintained since we were kids. Kevin was probably telling stories about his latest job interview or dating adventure. My parents were probably feeling content and successful, surrounded by their family and enjoying the prosperity that my financial backing had made possible. None of them were thinking about Tyler and Jessica, sleeping in the garage like unwanted relatives who'd overstayed their welcome. Brandon, I need you to look something up for me. Tomorrow morning, when you get a chance, I want you to research the exact terms of cosigner rights in Arizona. I want to know exactly what options I have, and what the process would look like. Tyler, are you sure about this? I mean, we're talking about your family's business here. This could get really ugly really fast. Jessica had stopped pretending to organize and was now watching me openly, her expression a mixture of curiosity and concern. She could only hear my side of the conversation, but she was smart enough to piece together the general direction of my thoughts. Brandon, let me ask you something. If a client came to you and said they'd co-signed a massive business loan for family members who then treated them like garbage, what would you advise them to do? Brandon sighed. I'd tell them to protect their financial interests first, and worry about hurt feelings later. Family or not, $150,000 is life-changing money, and if the people you're backing don't respect you enough to give you a decent place to sleep in their own home, they probably don't deserve your financial support. After hanging up with Brandon, I sat on an overturned crate and stared at the garage door that separated us from my family's Christmas celebration. Jessica settled beside me, her hand finding mine in the dim light. What are you thinking about? She asked softly. I'm thinking about the fact that I've spent the last 8 years trying to buy my way into this family, and tonight proved it's never going to work. I'm thinking about how they're in there celebrating their success and prosperity, success that exists partly because I put my financial future on the line for them. Jessica was quiet for a moment. And what are you thinking about doing? I'm thinking about what would happen if I stopped being their silent financial partner and started being their active financial partner, someone who demands respect because I have the power to require it. The next morning, Christmas Day, came with the sound of children's laughter and wrapping paper rustling in the house. Jessica and I had slept poorly on the air mattress, the cold concrete floor making every position uncomfortable. We'd whispered conversation until late into the night, talking through the implications of what I was considering. When we finally emerged from the garage around 8 a.m., the house smelled of coffee and Christmas breakfast. Ashley's kids were playing with new toys in the living room, supervised by my parents who looked well rested and content. Kevin was lounging in his pajamas, scrolling through his phone while eating what looked like expensive Belgian waffles. "Good morning, you two," my mom called cheerfully, as if nothing unusual had happened. "Coffee's fresh, and I made extra breakfast. How did you sleep?" The casual tone, the bright smile, the complete absence of embarrassment or apology, hit me like a physical blow. She was asking about our night in the garage with the same cheerful concern she might use to ask about a hotel stay. Jessica's grip on my arm tightened, a silent reminder to stay calm. "We slept fine, thank you," she replied politely, though I could hear the strain in her voice. My dad looked up from his newspaper, his reading glasses perched on his nose. "Tyler, I was thinking we might take a drive later, show Jessica some of the nice areas around Phoenix. Business has been good enough that we're thinking about looking at houses in Scottsdale."
Oh,
Houses in Scottsdale. Premium real estate made possible by a business expansion that I had personally guaranteed. They wanted to show off their prosperity to my girlfriend, never mentioning how that prosperity had become possible. "That sounds nice, Dad," I managed, accepting a cup of coffee from Mom's outstretched hand. Ashley appeared from the kitchen, her hair perfectly styled despite the early hour. "Tyler, I'm so glad you two made it down for Christmas. The kids have been asking about their uncle from Seattle." She gestured toward her children, who were too engrossed in their new electronics to acknowledge us. Kevin looked up from his phone with a grin. "Yeah, bro, good to see you. How's the tech world treating you?
oh,
Still making that computer money?" Computer money. As if my career was some kind of hobby that happened to generate income rather than the skilled profession that had made their current lifestyle possible. "It's going well," I replied neutrally, not trusting myself to say more. The morning continued with the familiar rhythm of family Christmas, but now I was watching it with different eyes. Every comfortable piece of furniture, every expensive toy, every casual mention of business success or family prosperity carried new weight. I wasn't just observing a family celebration, I was watching people enjoy benefits that my sacrifice had provided while treating me like an afterthought. When Brandon called around noon, I stepped outside to take the call privately. Jessica caught my eye and nodded, understanding that this conversation was important. "Tyler, I spent the morning researching cosigner rights in Arizona, and you have more options than I initially thought." Brandon's voice was serious, professional. "The specific terms of your loan agreement include several clauses that work in your favor." Clauses. First, you have the right to request detailed financial reports from the business at any time. Second, you can demand changes to business operations if you believe your financial interests are being compromised. Third, and this is the big one, you can call the loan due immediately if you determine that the primary borrowers are using business profits in ways that threaten loan repayment. I looked through the window at my family, laughing and comfortable in their beautifully decorated home, and felt a clarity I hadn't experienced in years. "Brandon, what would I need to do to exercise those rights?" "You'd need to formally notify the bank and the borrowers of your intentions, typically through certified mail or legal notice. The process is designed to protect cosigners from being taken advantage of by people who see them as silent financial partners rather than active stakeholders." After ending the call, I stood in my parents' front yard, looking at the house that represented everything I'd been trying to achieve with my family for years. Acceptance, respect, a place at their table instead of a mattress in their garage. But standing there on Christmas Day, I realized I'd been approaching the problem all wrong. I'd been trying to earn their respect through generosity, when what I should have been demanding was accountability through leverage. The garage door stood open, revealing the space where Jessica and I had spent Christmas Eve. Inside the house, my family continued their celebration, secure in the knowledge that their quiet, computer-focused son would continue being their reliable financial safety net without demanding anything uncomfortable in return. They were about to learn that their assumptions about Tyler Johnson needed some serious updating. That evening, after a day of polite family interaction and carefully controlled conversation, I made a decision that would change everything between us. Not just for this Christmas, but forever. Jessica and I were back in the garage, preparing for another night on the cold concrete floor, when I pulled out my laptop and began typing an email that would turn my family's comfortable world upside down. The subject line read, "Formal notice regarding Johnson Landscaping business loan." As I typed, I could hear the sounds of my family settling in for the night in their warm, comfortable bedrooms, never imagining that their financial foundation was about to shift beneath them. The email sat in my drafts folder for 3 hours while I refined every word, ensuring the language was clear, professional, and legally sound. Brandon had sent me a template that accountants used when dealing with loan disputes, and I'd adapted it to fit my specific situation with Johnson Landscaping. Jessica sat beside me on that uncomfortable air mattress, reading over my shoulder and occasionally suggesting changes that made the message sharper. The document I was crafting wasn't angry or emotional, which made it more powerful. It was a formal notice invoking my rights as co-signer to request immediate financial disclosure from Johnson Landscaping, including profit and loss statements for the past 2 years, detailed breakdowns of how loan funds had been allocated, and documentation of all business expenses over $10,000. The language was dry and technical, the kind of corporate communication that couldn't be dismissed with a joke or a casual wave of the hand. But the final paragraph carried the real weight. It stated clearly that based on preliminary concerns about financial management and loan security, I was formally notifying all parties that I was considering exercising my right to call the loan due within 60 days unless satisfactory financial documentation could be provided demonstrating responsible business practices and sustainable loan repayment capacity. Jessica read that paragraph twice, then looked at me with a mixture of admiration and concern. "Tyler, you realize this is going to blow up your entire family relationship, right? Once you send this, there's no taking it back." I thought about the garage we were sitting in, the casual dismissal we'd experienced, the years of being treated as a financial resource rather than a loved family member. What relationship, Jess? The one where I fund their lifestyle and they can't even give me a real bedroom when I visit. That's not a relationship worth preserving. She nodded slowly, her hand covering mine on the laptop keyboard. "Then send it. They need to understand that respect isn't optional, even in families, especially in families." My finger hovered over the send button at 11:47 p.m. on Christmas night. Through the thin garage walls, I could hear silence from the house, everyone presumably asleep in their comfortable beds, content with another successful holiday celebration. They had no idea that in 13 minutes, on December 26th at midnight, their son and brother was about to fundamentally alter the power dynamics in the Johnson family. At exactly midnight, I pressed send. The email went simultaneously to my parents' business account, their personal emails, and copied Brandon and Thomas Mitchell, the attorney Brandon had recommended who specialized in business disputes and co-signer rights. The CC line alone would signal that this wasn't a casual family disagreement but a formal business matter with legal implications. Jessica and I sat in silence for a moment after the email disappeared into the digital void. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. "Now we wait. The email has a RID receipt request, so we'll know exactly when they open it. My guess is sometime tomorrow morning when Dad checks his business email over coffee." We didn't have to wait that long. At 1:32 a.m. my phone buzzed with a RID receipt notification. Someone in the Johnson household was awake and checking email in the middle of the night. 3 minutes later my phone started ringing. Dad's number flashed on the screen and I could hear raised voices in the background even before I answered. Tyler, what the hell is this email? Dad's voice was tight with confusion and rising anger. What do you mean you're considering calling the loan due? This is our business we're talking about. You can't just threaten something like this on Christmas. I put the phone on speaker so Jessica could hear, and I kept my voice calm and professional. Dad, it's not a threat, it's a formal notice of my rights as a co-signer. I'm entitled to financial transparency about a loan I'm personally liable for, and I'm exercising that right. Financially transparency, Tyler, I'm your father, not some business partner you need to audit. This is insulting. The irony of him calling something insulting while Jessica and I were still sitting in his garage wasn't lost on me. Dad, when I co-signed that loan 3 years ago, I became exactly a business partner. A partner who's been covering loan payments when you couldn't make them, by the way. Did you think I wouldn't notice those months when the payment came from my account instead of yours? Silence on the other end. He hadn't known I was aware of those instances, times when I'd quietly transferred money to prevent default without making an issue of it. Tyler, son, if you needed us to pay you back for those months, you should have just said something. We can work out a payment plan or something. But this email, copying lawyers and accountants, making formal demands, this isn't how families handle things. No, Dad. Families handle things by making sure everyone has a comfortable place to sleep when they visit for Christmas. Families handle things with respect and consideration, not by sticking their son in a garage and acting like it's a reasonable accommodation. I heard Mom's voice in the background, sharp and demanding. What's going on? Why are you on the phone at this hour? Then her voice came closer as Dad apparently put his phone on speaker too. Tyler, what's this email about? Robert showed me some nonsense about calling our business loan due. Tell me this is some kind of joke. It's not a joke, Mom. It's a formal business communication about a loan I'm legally responsible for. I have a right to know how my financial interests are being managed, and I have a right to protect myself if I believe those interests are at risk. Risk? What risk? The business is doing fine. We've been making our payments. Mom's voice had that familiar edge of defensive anger that I remembered from childhood arguments. Actually, the business has missed 2 payments in the past 18 months that I had to cover personally. And based on the bank statements I receive as co-signer, your profit margins are much thinner than they should be given your contract volume. That suggests either poor financial management or undisclosed business expenses that might threaten loan repayment. Jessica squeezed my hand, her support silent but solid. Standing up to my parents like this with facts and legal rights instead of apologetic explanations felt foreign and powerful at the same time. Kevin's voice joined the conversation, sounding groggy but alert. Wait, Tyler's threatening to shut down the family business? Over what? Being asked to sleep in the garage? Dude, that's psychotic. Nobody's threatening to shut anything down, Kevin. I'm requesting financial documentation that I'm legally entitled to see. If the business is being managed responsibly, then providing that documentation shouldn't be a problem. Ashley's voice cut through next, and I could picture the scene in my parents' bedroom at nearly 2 a.m. The whole family gathered around Dad's phone like I was some kind of crisis they needed to manage collectively. Tyler, I don't understand what's happening here. You've always been so supportive of Mom and Dad's business. Why are you suddenly acting like this? I'm acting like someone who's been financially supporting this family for years while being treated like an afterthought. I'm acting like someone who co-signed a massive loan and has a right to know how that money is being used. I'm acting like someone who's done letting their generosity be mistaken for weakness. The silence that followed was heavy with shock. The Tyler they knew didn't talk back, didn't make demands, didn't use words like leverage and legal rights when it came to family matters. That Tyler had apparently disappeared sometime between being told to sleep in the garage and sending that midnight email. Dad's voice returned, attempting a calmer approach. Okay, Tyler, I hear that you're upset. The garage thing, that was just poor planning on our part. Ashley's kids needed their space, and Kevin had his stuff in the guest room. We didn't mean anything by it. If that's what this is about, let's talk about it like adults instead of bringing lawyers into family business. Dad, this stopped being just family business the moment I signed legal documents making me responsible for $150,000 in debt. And it's not just about the garage, though that was certainly illuminating. This is about a pattern of taking my financial support for granted while never treating me like an actual member of this family. Mom's voice rose sharply. Not treating you like family? Tyler, we raised you, fed you, put a roof over your head for 18 years. Everything we've done has been for this family, including building a business that could provide for all of us. A business that I made possible by risking my financial future, Mom. A business that you used to help Ashley and Kevin while keeping me at arm's length. When was the last time you offered to help me with anything? When was the last time you asked about my life instead of just my ability to wire money when you needed it? Jessica's eyes were wide as she listened to me articulate years of buried resentment in clear, unambiguous terms. This wasn't how the Johnson family communicated. We used implications and assumptions, careful politeness that avoided direct confrontation. Actually stating the problem out loud was breaking unspoken rules I'd been following my entire life. Kevin jumped back in, his voice defensive. Man, nobody forced you to co-sign that loan. You offered to help, now you're acting like we owe you something for being a decent brother and son. I am owed something, Kevin. Not money but basic human respect. And yes, you do owe me explanations about how business money is being spent when my credit and financial future are on the line. That's not being a difficult family member, that's being a responsible co-signer. Ashley tried a different approach, her voice taking on the soothing tone she probably used with her children. Tyler, I think everyone's just tired and emotional right now. It's late, we've all had a long day. Why don't we table this discussion until tomorrow when we can sit down calmly and work through whatever concerns you have? There's nothing to table, Ashley. The email is sent, the requests are formal, and I expect responses within the time frame outlined. This isn't a family discussion anymore. It's a business matter being handled through appropriate legal and financial channels. Dad's voice returned, and now I could hear real worry beneath the anger. Tyler, if you call this loan due, it could bankrupt us. We don't have $150,000 sitting in a bank account. We'd have to sell equipment, lay off employees, maybe lose everything we've built. You can't seriously be considering that. The weight of what I was threatening settled heavily in the cold garage air. This wasn't just about hurt feelings or wounded pride anymore. I was holding a financial weapon that could genuinely destroy my parents' business and livelihood. The question was whether I was willing to use it. Jessica watched my face carefully, and I knew she was wondering the same thing. Had I really thought through the full implications of this action? Or was I making threats in the heat of emotional pain that I'd regret when the consequences became real? Dad, I'm not trying to bankrupt you. I'm trying to establish that my role in this family needs to change. I've been your silent financial supporter for years, and that dynamic isn't working for me anymore. Either I become an actual partner with transparency and respect, or I protect my financial interests and step away from funding a family that doesn't value me. Value you? Tyler, of course we value you. Mom's voice had shifted to something that might have been genuine distress. You're our son. We love you, then prove it, Mom. Provide the financial documentation I requested. Show me that the business I helped build is being managed responsibly. Treat Jessica and me with the same consideration you show Ashley and Kevin. That's all I'm asking for. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes. Going in circles as my family alternated between anger, guilt-tripping, and attempts at negotiation. But I held firm to my central point, repeating it in various forms until even Kevin seemed to understand that I wasn't backing down. When I finally ended the call at 2:15 a.m., Jessica and I sat in stunned silence for a moment. The enormity of what I'd just set in motion hung in the air between us like smoke after an explosion. That was intense. Jessica said finally, her voice soft in the darkness. Your whole family on speakerphone at 2 in the morning trying to talk you down from your position. How do you feel? I considered the question carefully. How did I feel? Scared, certainly. Guilty about the potential consequences. Worried that I'd gone too far and damaged family relationships beyond repair. But underneath all of that was something I hadn't felt in years when it came to my family: powerful, in control, respected, even if that respect came from fear rather than love. I feel like I should have done this years ago, I admitted. Not the nuclear option of threatening the loan, but standing up for myself, drawing boundaries. Demanding to be treated like an adult family member instead of just an ATM with a Christmas card mailing address. Jessica pulled me close, and we lay back on the uncomfortable air mattress, staring at the garage ceiling. What do you think they'll do? I think they'll provide the financial documentation because they don't have a choice, and I think when I review it, I'm going to find exactly what I suspect, that they've been using business profits to fund lifestyle choices instead of building financial stability. The new furniture, Ashley's help with her car, Kevin's apartment, all of it coming from a business that exists because I put my financial future on the line. And then what? Then I decide whether I'm willing to continue being part of this family dynamic, or whether I need to protect myself by ending my financial involvement with them completely. The rest of that night passed slowly, neither of us sleeping much despite our exhaustion. Every sound from the house made us wonder if another family confrontation was coming. Every buzz of my phone had me checking to see if someone was sending follow-up texts or emails trying to change my mind about the formal requests I'd made. But the night remained quiet after that explosive 2 a.m. phone call. The Johnson family was apparently processing this new reality where their quiet, accommodating son had transformed into someone who knew his legal rights and wasn't afraid to use them. Morning came with weak winter sunshine filtering through the garage's small window. Jessica and I packed our belongings in silence, loading the car systematically like we were checking out of a hotel rather than leaving a family home. Neither of us wanted to extend this visit longer than necessary, and I'd already decided we would drive back to Seattle that day instead of staying through the 27th as originally planned. I was carrying our last bag to the car when Dad appeared in the driveway, his face haggard from lack of sleep. He'd obviously been waiting for us, probably watching through the window for signs that we were leaving. "Tyler, can we talk for a minute, just you and me?" Jessica caught my eye, silently asking if I wanted her to stay or give us privacy. I nodded toward the car, and she climbed into the passenger seat, giving Dad and me space while remaining close enough to intervene if needed. Dad looked older in the morning light, the lines around his eyes deeper than I remembered. His landscaping business had been his pride and joy, the thing that gave him identity and purpose beyond just being a husband and father. Threatening that business had clearly shaken him in ways our late-night phone call hadn't fully revealed. "Son, I didn't sleep at all last night, been thinking about what you said, about feeling like we don't value you, about being treated like an ATM instead of a family member." He rubbed his face tiredly. "I need you to understand that was never our intention. Intention doesn't matter much when the impact is the same, Dad. Whether you meant to take advantage of my generosity or not, the result is that I've given this family hundreds of thousands of dollars in direct payments and loan guarantees, and last night I slept in your garage." He flinched at that, the concrete example of his failure to treat me with basic respect hitting harder than abstract discussions about feeling undervalued. The garage thing was Patricia's idea. Ashley's kids get rowdy in new places, and she thought keeping them in their grandparents' house would help them sleep better. Kevin had the guest room because he's been staying there while looking for work. It wasn't about you specifically. That's exactly the problem, Dad. It's never about me specifically. I'm the flexible one, the understanding one, the one who can be asked to accommodate because I won't make a fuss. But being low maintenance doesn't mean I don't deserve consideration. It doesn't mean my comfort and dignity are less important than everyone else's. Dad was quiet for a moment, staring at the concrete driveway. "Your mother is furious, you know. She thinks you're being manipulative, using your financial position to force us to treat you a certain way. She said it's like emotional blackmail." I felt anger flash hot in my chest, Emotional blackmail. I offered to help this family for years with no strings attached, no demands for special treatment. All I wanted was to be included, to be valued as something more than a bank account. And when you couldn't even give me that basic respect, I decided to protect my financial interests. That's not blackmail, Dad. That's self-preservation. I know, I know. He held up his hands in a gesture of surrender. I'm not saying she's right, I'm telling you how she's reacting because you need to be prepared for it. Patricia doesn't back down easily, and she's going to fight you. There's nothing to fight about. I've made formal legal requests that I'm entitled to make. Either you provide the documentation or you face the consequences of refusing. Those are the only options. Dad's shoulders slumped, the consequences being you call the loan due and potentially bankrupt your own family's business. Tyler, you're talking about destroying the thing I've spent 20 years building. Is that really what you want? It was a fair question, and one I'd been asking myself since sending that midnight email. Did I actually want to destroy Johnson Landscaping? Did I want to be responsible for my parents potentially losing everything, for employees losing their jobs, for the ripple effects that would spread through our extended family? What I want, Dad, is for you to run your business responsibly, so that I never have to consider calling the loan due. What I want is transparency about how my financial risk is being managed. What I want is to be treated like a valued family member instead of a convenient source of funding. None of that requires destroying anything, it just requires treating me with respect. He nodded slowly, seeming to age another year before my eyes. I'll talk to Patricia. We'll get you the financial documents you requested. Thomas Mitchell, that's the attorney you copied on the email. I looked him up this morning. He's expensive, and he's got a reputation for being aggressive in business disputes. Good, that's exactly why Brandon recommended him. I want you to understand that this isn't casual, Dad. I'm serious about protecting my interests, and I have professional representation to help me do it. Dad looked toward the house where I could see Mom watching through the living room window, her face set in angry lines. This is going to change everything between us, you know. Even if we provide what you're asking for, even if we work this out, our relationship won't be the same. I thought about that for a moment, about the relationship we'd had before this confrontation, a relationship where I gave endlessly while receiving scraps of acknowledgement in return. A relationship where my value was measured by my willingness to fund their choices rather than by any genuine connection or mutual respect. You're right, Dad, our relationship won't be the same. With any luck, it'll be better. It'll be based on honesty and mutual respect, instead of unspoken expectations and one-sided financial support, and if it can't be better, then maybe it's better that it changes completely. I climbed into the car where Jessica was waiting, and we pulled out of the driveway without looking back at the house. Through the rearview mirror, I saw Dad still standing there, watching us leave, his posture defeated in a way I'd never seen before. The drive back to Seattle was long and mostly quiet, both of us processing what had happened. Jessica held my hand across the center console, her presence steady and supportive even when words felt inadequate. Around hour 4 of the drive, somewhere in Nevada, she finally spoke. Do you regret it? Sending that email confronting them, potentially blowing up your family relationships. I thought about sleeping in that garage, about the years of being overlooked and undervalued, about the casual way my mom had delivered the news that I wasn't important enough for a real bedroom. I thought about the relief I'd felt standing up to my dad in the driveway, finally articulating years of buried resentment instead of swallowing it down one more time. No, I said firmly. I don't regret it at all. Whatever happens next, at least I'm not pretending anymore. I'm not acting like everything's fine when it's not. I'm not funding a family that can't be bothered to treat me with basic human dignity. Jessica squeezed my hand. Because watching you stand up to them, seeing you recognize your own worth and demand to be treated accordingly, that was one of the most attractive things I've ever witnessed. I'm proud of you, Tyler. Her words settled warmly in my chest, a contrast to the cold garage and colder family interactions we'd left behind. This was what support looked like, what love looked like, someone who stood beside you when you made difficult choices instead of demanding you make yourself smaller to keep everyone else comfortable. My phone buzzed repeatedly throughout the drive, texts from various family members trying different approaches to change my mind. Ashley sent a long message about how my actions were hurting mom and dad, how family was supposed to forgive and work through problems instead of bringing lawyers into personal matters. Kevin sent shorter, angrier texts calling me selfish and vindictive. Mom's texts were brief and cold, informing me that she was deeply disappointed in my behavior, and that I was destroying this family over hurt feelings. I didn't respond to any of them. The time for emotional appeals and guilt trips had passed. I'd made formal legal and financial requests, and those requests would be answered through proper channels or not at all. Brandon called that evening after we'd made it home to Seattle, our apartment feeling safe and calm after the chaos of Phoenix. "Tyler, I heard from Thomas Mitchell. He's reviewed your case, and he's confident you have strong grounds for everything you've requested. Your parents' attorney will probably contact you soon trying to negotiate." Their attorney. They hired a lawyer already, of course they did. You threatened their business with a formal legal notice. They'd be stupid not to get representation, but Thomas says not to worry. Your position is solid, and you have rights that can't be negotiated away just because feelings are hurt. That night, lying in my own bed with Jessica beside me, I felt a strange mix of emotions: relief at being home, anxiety about what I'd set in motion, guilt about potentially hurting my parents. But underneath all of that was something unexpected: excitement about finally standing up for myself, about demanding to be treated with the respect I deserved, about recognizing that being family didn't give anyone unlimited access to my resources or my dignity. The Johnson family Christmas of that year would be remembered as the one where everything changed, where quiet Tyler finally found his voice and used it to demand accountability from people who'd taken his generosity for granted for far too long. Whatever happened next, there was no going back to the old dynamic. The garage had been the final straw, but it wasn't the real problem. The real problem had been building for years, and now it was finally being addressed, whether my family wanted to face it or not. 2 weeks after that disastrous Christmas, a thick manila envelope arrived at my Seattle apartment via certified mail.
Oh,
The return address showed Johnson Landscaping's business office, and the signature confirmation told me that my parents had finally responded to my formal requests for financial documentation. Jessica and I sat at our kitchen table as I carefully opened the envelope, pulling out what appeared to be years of business records, profit and loss statements, and expense reports that my parents had been forced to compile under legal pressure. The numbers told a story that was somehow both expected and shocking. Johnson Landscaping was indeed profitable, generating nearly $200,000 in annual revenue after expenses, but the expense side revealed exactly what I'd suspected. Over the past 3 years, my parents had written off nearly $75,000 in questionable business expenses that looked suspiciously like personal spending disguised as company costs. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.